It was a love story built on promises of forever. Desmond Carter and LaToya Carter. A couple everyone envied. Desmond, a charming, skilled chef adored by his students and colleagues at the Oregon Culinary Institute. And LaToya, a woman whose passion for storytelling drove her to spend countless nights hunched over a keyboard, chasing a dream she could never quite grasp. From the outside, their marriage seemed unbreakable. They shared dreams, laughter, and plans for a future that no one could have predicted would end so brutally. But all stories have cracks. Some that stretch wide enough for darkness to seep in. And theirs was no exception. Beneath the polished surface of Desmond's culinary success and LaToya's unrelenting ambition, there was something else, something that would push their marriage past the breaking point. It all began with desperation. LaToya's writing career was floundering, her books failing to make the impact she craved. With bills piling up and rejection letters stacking higher than her dwindling hopes, the pressure became unbearable. And when dreams start to die, survival becomes the only thing left to cling to. But survival came with a cost. LaToya found herself drowning in financial failure. She had pinned all her hopes on her novels, believing that one day, one of them would become her golden ticket. But as the years went by and success remained elusive, the desperation grew sharper, more urgent. Desmond was the stable one. His teaching job at the Culinary Institute provided a steady income, enough to keep their heads above water but never enough to satisfy LaToya's growing desire for something more. The thought of being ordinary terrified her. And the bitterness of unfulfilled dreams soon soured their once loving marriage. But then, LaToya stumbled upon a way out. A way to erase the debt, the struggle, the disappointment. It was so simple, too simple. And all it required was the death of the man she once loved. That's when the research began. Not for a new novel, but for something much more sinister. LaToya's internet history became a roadmap of obsession, searches about firearms, gun modifications, untraceable parts. She purchased a Glock 17, but she didn't stop there. A separate slide and barrel followed, ensuring the weapon could be altered, making any traces to her nearly impossible to detect. But murder is never as clean as the imagination makes it seem. And despite all her planning, there was one thing she could never control, herself. June 2, 2018. It was supposed to be another normal morning at the Oregon Culinary Institute. Desmond arrived early, ready to prepare for his students. But this day would be his last. 2 gunshots echoed through the quiet halls. The man who was loved and admired by so many was left bleeding out on the cold floor. As the news spread, the city of Portland was gripped with shock. Desmond's death was a tragedy. But what no one realized was that his death was only the beginning of a far more chilling story. LaToya played the role of a grieving widow well. Tears at the memorial service, sorrowful speeches about the love of her life. But what no one expected was that her performance had begun long before Desmond's death. And behind the mask of grief, there was something else, something darker. What drives a woman to kill her husband? Was it pure greed, or something even more twisted? And how does a woman who writes about love and passion come to believe that murder is the only way to secure her future? What really happened between Desmond and LaToya Carter? As we unravel the truth behind this chilling crime, remember, not every love story has a happy ending. And not every crime is committed by a stranger lurking in the shadows. Sometimes, the greatest danger comes from the person standing right beside you. Desmond Carter was a man everyone admired. Charismatic, skilled, respected. His dedication to the culinary arts was unmatched, his teaching at the Oregon Culinary Institute praised by students and colleagues alike. He had a way of making everyone feel welcome, of drawing people into his world with nothing but his smile and the passion he brought to his craft. To those who knew him, Desmond was more than a chef, he was an inspiration. And then there was LaToya Carter. The woman who seemed to have it all. Her confidence was her armor, her drive unstoppable. But beneath her polished exterior lay frustration. Her writing career was never what she dreamed it would be. For every book she published, she received twice as many rejection letters. She was living a life of struggle masked by ambition. The kind of ambition that feeds on dreams until nothing else matters. Together, they were supposed to be a power couple. Desmond's steady job and reputation provided stability, while LaToya's writing was meant to be the flame that lit their future. But things were never quite as perfect as they appeared. The money Desmond earned was barely enough to keep them afloat. LaToya's failed attempts to break into the mainstream publishing world only deepened the tension between them. The bills were stacking up. Mortgage payments, car loans, credit card debt, every month seemed worse than the last. And with each passing day, their arguments grew more frequent, more heated. Desmond wanted LaToya to face reality, to abandon her dreams of becoming a best-selling author and take a more stable job. Something practical. Something that could help ease their financial strain. But for LaToya, giving up her writing meant admitting failure. And that was something she could never accept. Their arguments turned cruel, the kind of words that cut deeper than any knife. Desmond's patience was thinning, his love for her slowly replaced by disappointment and resentment. And LaToya, trapped in a world of rejection and failure, grew to despise the man who once supported her dreams. In her eyes, he became a reminder of everything she couldn't achieve. But even as their marriage crumbled, LaToya was already formulating a plan. One that would end her struggles forever. The seeds were planted quietly, hidden beneath the surface of their deteriorating relationship. And no one could have predicted what would come next. As the debts grew heavier, LaToya's desperation intensified. She started making subtle changes to their finances, taking out several life insurance policies on Desmond. The amounts were staggering. Over $1 million worth. And yet, Desmond had no idea. He was too busy working late hours at the Culinary Institute, trying to keep their lives from falling apart. LaToya's obsession with money and success only grew. And with that obsession came a darkness she couldn't control. Her research began innocently enough. Gun shops, pawn stores, the kind of places where she could make quiet purchases without raising suspicion. She bought a Glock 17, justifying it to herself as protection, nothing more. But the truth was far more disturbing. The days turned into weeks. The research continued. The planning grew more intricate. And all the while, Desmond was completely unaware. He was too consumed with his work, his passion for teaching overshadowing the warning signs flashing right in front of him. And then there was LaToya's writing. Her once romantic novels now twisted into something far more unsettling. Stories of betrayal, of revenge, of death. Her imagination became her weapon. And in her twisted mind, the lines between fiction and reality began to blur. But it wasn't enough to have a gun. She needed to be sure that nothing could be traced back to her. That's when she made another purchase. A separate slide and barrel for the Glock. If things went according to plan, the weapon would be untraceable. A clean kill. No evidence left behind. But LaToya's obsession didn't end there. She became meticulous, poring over every detail of her plan with a precision that bordered on madness. She even began to write down her thoughts, not in the form of a novel, but as a blueprint. Notes about how to stage an alibi, how to manipulate the truth, how to cover her tracks so perfectly that no one would ever suspect her. To the outside world, LaToya was still the devoted wife, the struggling novelist clinging to her dreams. No one suspected the darkness that had taken hold of her. No one saw the way her gaze lingered on Desmond just a little too long. The way her smile twisted into something unrecognizable when she thought no one was watching. And for Desmond, life continued as it always had. He worked late, taught his students, and came home to a marriage that felt more like a burden than a blessing. But even then, he never imagined that the woman he once loved was plotting his murder. He never imagined that every moment he spent with her was one moment closer to his death. LaToya's obsession with control grew stronger. And her patience was wearing thin. The plan was in place. The tools were ready. All she needed was the perfect opportunity. And that opportunity was about to present itself in the most unexpected way. June 2nd, 2018. The day everything would change. Desmond woke up early, his mind already focused on his work. He left the house without any idea of the danger awaiting him, without any idea that his wife had already made her final decision. The decision to end his life for good. LaToya's plan was now in motion. And once it began, there would be no turning back. Debt became the silent predator haunting their lives. It crept into every conversation, every decision, every sleepless night. Desmond was holding it together the best way he could. Long hours at the Culinary Institute, extra classes to bring in a little more money. But no matter how hard he worked, it was never enough. And LaToya was the one who felt the weight of their failures the most. Her writing was proving unsuccessful. Manuscripts rejected by publishers. Online sales dwindling. The one thing she had poured her heart and soul into was turning against her. And Desmond's patience was wearing thin. The man who once encouraged her to chase her dreams now saw them as nothing more than a drain on their already strained finances. His words became sharp, accusing. Why couldn't she be satisfied with a real job? Why couldn't she let go of her childish ambitions and contribute to the household in a practical way? But LaToya couldn't let go. Writing wasn't just a dream to her. It was her identity. And watching it all slip away while her husband's resentment grew made something snap inside her. Desperation can force people to do the unthinkable. And LaToya's mind was already racing with ideas that went far beyond fiction. What if she could have the life she always dreamed of? A life free of Desmond's judgment, his growing coldness. A life built on her own terms. And it was that twisted desire for control that led her to a dark realization. Desmond was worth more to her dead than alive. $1 million in life insurance policies. Money that could clear their debts, fund her writing career, give her the freedom she craved. But murder was a different kind of story. And if she was going to do this, she needed to make sure it was perfect. That's when the research became her obsession. Gun parts, untraceable weapons, disguises, alibis. But her thoughts were too chaotic, too restless to be contained. She needed to make sense of it all. To write it down. Words on a page. Dark, twisted words. But were they just fiction? To the outside world, her essay How to Murder Your Husband was nothing more than a provocative piece of writing. A creative exercise meant to shock and thrill. But for LaToya, it was a blueprint. A roadmap to the freedom she believed was within her grasp. Every line of that essay held a piece of her twisted plan. Methods of killing, motives, ways to cover her tracks. She convinced herself it was all just fantasy, a way to vent her frustration. But deep down, she knew the truth. It was preparation. Every day she would add to it. New ideas. New methods. A sick sort of puzzle she was determined to solve. And while her mind churned with deadly possibilities, her relationship with Desmond continued to crumble. Their arguments grew more brutal. His dismissive tone, her icy responses. And through it all, she kept writing, kept plotting, kept convincing herself that this was the only way. Desmond's suspicion began to grow. He saw the change in her. The late nights. The secrecy. But he was too preoccupied with his own problems to fully grasp what was happening. His job at the Culinary Institute demanded all his attention. And when he wasn't working, he was trying to salvage the ruins of their marriage. But LaToya was already lost. Lost to her obsession, her hatred, her greed. And as the weeks passed, the line between fiction and reality began to blur. She was no longer writing a story. She was preparing for something real. Something final. But even with her plan in place, there were doubts. Flashes of guilt that threatened to unravel everything she had built. And yet, the vision of that life without Desmond, that life of wealth and freedom, was too intoxicating to abandon. LaToya knew she had to go through with it. She had invested too much, planned too carefully. And all she needed now was the perfect opportunity. A moment where Desmond would be vulnerable. A moment where she could strike without anyone suspecting her. But as her plans grew darker, so did her paranoia. She became obsessed with covering her tracks, with eliminating any possibility of failure. The gun she purchased was modified with the additional slide and barrel she bought separately. A precaution meant to throw off anyone who might try to trace the bullets back to her. Everything was falling into place. And the closer she came to executing her plan, the more desperate she became to make sure nothing went wrong. But LaToya was about to learn that even the most carefully laid plans have flaws. And in her quest for control, she had overlooked one crucial detail: herself. And then it happened. The day everything changed. The day her obsession became her reality. Desmond was already at the Culinary Institute, preparing for his students, his mind focused on his work. And LaToya's mind was focused on him. On what she had to do. On what she was finally ready to do. She had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times. Played it over and over in her mind until the guilt became nothing more than background noise. She convinced herself it was the only way. That Desmond's death was the only path to her freedom. But there's something about making the decision to end a life that changes everything. Something that leaves a mark no amount of planning can erase. And as LaToya put her plan into motion, there was no turning back. She was about to learn the hard way that nothing is ever as simple as it seems. LaToya's obsession deepened. What started as a desperate fantasy had become her all-consuming reality. Her search history was a reflection of her growing madness. Firearms, ballistics, gun modifications, methods of disposal. Every possible way to end a life and get away with it. It was no longer just an idea. It was a mission. She had already purchased the Glock 17. A sleek, powerful handgun she convinced herself was for protection. But the truth was much darker. That gun was meant for only one purpose. And to make sure nothing could be traced back to her, she bought a separate slide and barrel, creating a deadly combination meant to eliminate any possibility of evidence. But LaToya's research went far beyond just the weapon. She studied crime cases, dissecting the mistakes others made, the errors that led them to prison cells instead of freedom. And every new discovery only fueled her obsession to be perfect. To commit the perfect crime. Her essay, How to Murder Your Husband, had once been nothing more than a creative release, a piece of dark writing meant to shock and intrigue. But now, it was something else entirely. A foreshadowing of what was to come. A chilling manifesto of her own twisted desires. And while she drowned herself in research, her marriage continued to disintegrate. The arguments grew worse, the distance between them growing wider by the day. Desmond was no longer the man she had once loved. In her eyes, he had become an obstacle. A problem to be solved. But LaToya's obsession wasn't only about revenge. It was about money. Over $1 million in life insurance policies. A fortune that could change her life forever. A fortune she could never touch as long as Desmond was still alive. And so, she continued her preparations. Quietly. Methodically. Convincing herself that her actions were justified. That Desmond's death was the only way she could be free. Free to pursue her dreams. Free to live the life she deserved. But there was something else. Something she hadn't accounted for. Herself. Her paranoia grew stronger with every passing day. The thought of failure gnawed at her mind. What if something went wrong? What if the gun malfunctioned? What if she was caught? The possibilities spun through her thoughts like a vicious cycle, threatening to destroy everything she had worked so hard to build. But even as her doubts grew, so did her determination. She had come too far to turn back. And there was only one way this story could end. Then, one night, Desmond confronted her. His voice was harsh, his patience long gone. He accused her of wasting their money on her failed writing career, of dragging them both into debt. But his anger was nothing compared to the coldness LaToya felt inside. His words only confirmed what she had known all along. Desmond had given up on her. And she had already given up on him. The plan was set. The gun was ready. The life insurance policies were waiting. All she needed was the right moment. And that moment came on June 2, 2018. Desmond left the house early that morning, heading to the Oregon Culinary Institute for another long day of teaching. LaToya waited until he was gone before putting her plan into motion. She slipped the gun into her bag, her fingers trembling with anticipation. But there was no room for fear now. Fear was a luxury she couldn't afford. She arrived near the Culinary Institute, parking her car just out of sight. The place was quiet, deserted. The perfect setting for what she was about to do. She watched as Desmond entered the building, his mind focused on his work, unaware of the danger lurking just outside. And for a brief moment, LaToya hesitated. The weight of what she was about to do pressed down on her like a crushing force. But that hesitation was brief. A flicker of weakness she quickly extinguished. She followed him inside. Moving quietly, her eyes fixed on her target. And when the moment came, she didn't think. She didn't question. She just acted. 2 gunshots. The sound echoed through the empty halls, sharp and final. Desmond fell to the floor, his body crumpling beneath him. His eyes wide with shock, his life slipping away before he even understood what had happened. LaToya stood over him, her breath coming in shallow gasps. And then, without another word, she turned and walked away, leaving him to die alone on the cold, hard floor. The perfect crime. Or so she thought. The investigation began almost immediately. The police swarmed the institute, their questions sharp, their suspicion growing with every new discovery. And while LaToya put on the performance of her life as the grieving widow, the detectives were already piecing together the truth. The gun she thought was untraceable was only the beginning. Surveillance footage captured her car parked near the Culinary Institute. Her alibi began to fall apart the moment the detectives started digging. And then there was her internet history. The research. The purchases. The essay that would prove to be her undoing. One by one, the pieces of her plan unraveled. And no matter how carefully she had prepared, she couldn't escape the truth. But as the evidence mounted, something unexpected happened. LaToya's paranoia shifted. What if someone was framing her? What if the police were twisting the facts to fit their own version of events? The thought consumed her. It twisted her reality until she could no longer distinguish between her own guilt and the conspiracy she believed was closing in on her. But even as her mind began to fracture, she clung to one final hope. That her plan had been perfect. That somehow, she would walk away from this nightmare unscathed. But there was one thing she hadn't counted on. One detail she had overlooked. And that detail was about to shatter everything she had built. Her performance is flawless. Tears streaming down her face as she attends the memorials. Her voice breaking as she talks about the man she loved. No one questions her grief. No one suspects the woman who appears so shattered by her husband's death. The police investigation begins almost immediately. But it's not what LaToya expected. She had assumed the police would see the murder as a random act of violence. Something unrelated to her. But the detectives are thorough. And their suspicions are immediate. The fact that nothing was stolen from the institute makes them question the motive. This wasn't a robbery. This was something personal. And they start looking at the people closest to Desmond, including his wife. At first, there are no leads. No suspects. Just a grieving widow and a community in shock. But detectives aren't willing to give up so easily. They begin to dig deeper. And what they find is more disturbing than anyone could have imagined. They look into Desmond's financial records. His life insurance policies. And it doesn't take long for them to uncover the millions of dollars in potential payouts. Money that would only be released upon his death. And then there's the matter of the gun. LaToya had been so careful. She made sure the gun was modified with the additional slide and barrel, believing it would make her plan foolproof. But she hadn't accounted for the detectives' persistence. They begin to trace the purchases. The firearm, the extra parts. And with every new piece of evidence, the noose tightens around her neck. But Latoya doesn't know any of this. As far as she's concerned, her plan worked perfectly. She maintains her act as the devastated widow, playing the part with precision. And while the detectives continue to gather evidence, she begins to indulge in her newfound freedom. The money is still out of reach, tangled up in insurance investigations and paperwork. But Latoya is already spending it in her mind, planning the life she believes she deserves, the life she sacrificed her husband to obtain. But the detectives are relentless. They start to question her more aggressively. Their words are carefully chosen, meant to unnerve her, to break through the mask she's so carefully constructed. And for the first time, Latoya feels something she hasn't felt in a long time. Fear. Her paranoia grows. She becomes convinced that the detectives are watching her, that they're setting traps, waiting for her to slip. And as the investigation drags on, her mind begins to unravel. But it's not just the police that are making her nervous. There are other complications. Loose ends she never anticipated. People she hadn't accounted for. One of Desmond's students, a young woman named Brianna, starts making noise. She claims she saw something that morning. A shadow moving through the halls before anyone else had arrived. A figure she couldn't quite make out. But her insistence becomes a problem. And Latoya knows she has to silence her before her curiosity leads her straight to the truth. But how far is Latoya willing to go to protect her secret? How many more lives is she willing to destroy in her quest for freedom? And how long before the pressure becomes too much to bear? The detectives continue to close in, their questions becoming more pointed, their suspicions more evident. And Latoya's once flawless performance begins to crack. The plan she believed was perfect is falling apart. And with every new revelation, the truth becomes harder to hide. But Latoya isn't ready to give up. Not yet. Not when everything she's ever wanted is still within reach. But she's about to learn a hard lesson. That there's always a price to pay for deception. And some prices are far too high. Detectives dig deeper. Every detail, every record, every moment of Latoya's life becomes part of their investigation. They start with the gun. The Glock 17 she believed was her key to freedom. They trace her purchase, the dates, the location. The extra slide and barrel she ordered separately to ensure nothing could be traced back to her. But nothing stays hidden forever. And her attempts to cover her tracks only make them look closer. The search history on her computer is a treasure trove of evidence. Gun modifications, ways to evade ballistic tracing, methods of disposal. It all leads to one conclusion. And the detectives are starting to see the pattern. But the investigation doesn't stop there. They dig through her finances, the insurance policies, the emails she thought were deleted. And with every new discovery, her perfect crime begins to fall apart. But Latoya's arrogance blinds her to what's happening. She thinks her act of grief is working. That her tears and carefully rehearsed words are enough to convince everyone that she is innocent. But the detectives are relentless. They begin pulling phone records, analyzing every call, every text. And when they dig through her social media, they find messages filled with frustration, anger, bitterness. Hints of a woman on the edge, willing to do whatever it takes to get what she wants. Then comes the surveillance footage. The morning of Desmond's murder. The security cameras near the Culinary Institute. And there it is. Her car. Parked near the building. The timestamp confirms everything. She was there. Her alibi is nothing but a lie. And the detectives know it. But what they discover next is even more damning. Latoya's essay. The twisted piece of writing titled How to Murder Your Husband. To the detectives, it reads like a confession hidden under the guise of fiction. Methods of killing, motives, instructions on how to cover up the crime. It's all there. Her own words becoming the noose tightening around her neck. The detectives confront her with the evidence. The gun purchases. The surveillance footage. The life insurance policies. The essay. And for the first time, Latoya's mask begins to slip. Her confidence cracks, her words stumbling over one another as she tries to explain away the mounting evidence. She insists the essay was nothing more than fiction, a creative exercise. She claims the gun was for protection, nothing more. But the detectives aren't buying it. They can see the fear in her eyes, the desperation in her voice. As the interrogation continues, LaToya's lies grow more desperate. She tries to shift the blame, suggesting that someone else must have been responsible. That the evidence was planted. That the detectives were twisting her words to fit their narrative. But nothing she says can explain away the evidence. The search history. The surveillance footage. The insurance policies she thought would secure her freedom. And most damning of all, her own words. The essay that now stands as a twisted testament to her guilt. The detectives have enough. They arrest her, charging her with the murder of Desmond Carter. And as she's led away in handcuffs, her mind spins with disbelief. How did it all go so wrong? How did the plan that seemed so perfect fall apart so completely? But her story is far from over. The trial is a spectacle. The media can't get enough of the case. The grieving widow turned murderess. The aspiring novelist who used her own life as inspiration for her crime. The public is captivated. Horrified. And yet, they can't look away. The prosecutors paint a chilling picture of a woman driven by greed and desperation. They lay out the evidence piece by piece, constructing a narrative so cold, so calculated, that even the most skeptical members of the jury are left speechless. They highlight her financial motives. The millions of dollars in life insurance policies that would have solved all her problems. They describe her internet searches, her purchases, the essay that now reads like a confession written long before the crime was ever committed. But LaToya doesn't give up. She takes the stand, her voice trembling as she tries to convince the jury of her innocence. She cries, she begs, she pleads. But her words only serve to dig her deeper into the hole she's created. The cross-examination is brutal. The prosecutors tear apart her alibi, her motives, her carefully crafted lies. And as the days of the trial drag on, LaToya's confidence continues to crumble. The jury listens, horrified by her calculated deceit. By the way she used her own creativity to plan a murder she believed would set her free. But instead, it only led her straight to a prison cell. In the end, the verdict is unanimous. Guilty. The word echoes through the courtroom, sealing LaToya's fate. The aspiring novelist who dreamed of writing the perfect story is now the subject of her own twisted tale. A story of greed, betrayal, and a desperation so powerful it destroyed everything she once held dear. As she's led away from the courtroom, her eyes are hollow. The reality of her own creation finally sinking in. And for the first time, she understands the true cost of her ambition. A cost far greater than any amount of money could ever repay. But even as the door closes on her future, one question remains. How did a woman who once wrote about love and passion fall so far? How did her dreams turn into a nightmare she could never escape? And most importantly, how many others like her are out there, believing they can create the perfect crime, only to find themselves caught in the darkness they once thought they could control? The woman who once believed herself capable of creating the perfect crime now faces a future where the only words she'll write are appeals and desperate letters from a prison cell. The media feeds on the story, painting her as a monster, a woman consumed by ambition and greed. But there's another side to her story, one that many refuse to acknowledge. Was LaToya truly driven by cold-blooded ambition? Or was she a woman pushed to the edge by desperation, trapped by circumstances she could no longer control? The courtroom drama becomes a spectacle. Reporters dissect her every word, her every gesture. Commentators debate whether her actions were born from greed or madness. But the truth is more complicated than anyone is willing to admit. And while the world judges her, LaToya clings to one final hope. That maybe, just maybe, she can convince someone to believe her side of the story. That her actions were a tragic mistake, a desperate attempt to escape the life she felt trapped in. But even that hope begins to fade as the months turn into years, her appeals rejected, her life slipping away within the confines of her cell. But what about Desmond? His legacy becomes a different kind of story. The Oregon Culinary Institute erects a memorial in his honor, his students and colleagues paying tribute to the man who inspired them all. His name becomes a symbol of resilience, of passion, of everything LaToya could never understand. But there's something else. A quiet rumor that begins to spread. A suggestion that Desmond wasn't as innocent as everyone believed. Whispers of an affair. A secret relationship he had been hiding from his wife. Evidence that surfaces too late to change the course of events, but enough to make people question everything they thought they knew. Could it be that Desmond's betrayal was the final push that drove LaToya to murder? Or is this just another layer of deception in a story already steeped in lies? The truth remains elusive. But one thing is certain. LaToya's obsession destroyed everything. Her marriage. Her freedom. Her life. And in the end, she became the villain of her own story. The woman who wrote her own downfall. As the years pass, her name becomes nothing more than a footnote in the true crime archives. Another cautionary tale of greed, betrayal, and a mind twisted by obsession. But the questions remain. Was LaToya truly a monster? Or was she a woman driven to madness by forces beyond her control? Some say she was nothing more than a heartless killer. Others believe she was a victim of her own ambition, a woman who lost herself in the darkness she tried to create. But the truth? The truth may never be known. Because sometimes, the darkest secrets are the ones we keep hidden from ourselves. Some stories are too dark to be fiction. And some truths are far more terrifying than any novel. If you think this story was twisted, just remember, it's only one of many. Desmond Carter's tragic death and LaToya's shocking betrayal may be over, but the darkness behind such crimes is far from gone. The desire for power, money, and control can drive people to do unthinkable things. And sometimes, the real horror lies not in the act itself, but in the motive behind it. If you want more stories that reveal the darkest corners of the human soul, stories of betrayal, obsession, and greed, then this is only the beginning. The truth is always stranger than fiction. And what you've just heard is only one chapter in a world filled with deception and despair. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more true crime stories that dig deep into the minds of those who would do anything to get what they want. And if you have your own theories about what really happened to Desmond Carter, share them below. Because sometimes, the truth is buried under layers of lies. And who knows? Maybe one day, you'll uncover the truth that everyone else missed. Because in the end, the truth is always waiting to be discovered. And it's always more terrifying than anything you could ever imagine.